Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to elaborate on energy policy making in Iceland, with the emphasis on geothermal energy. However, we Icelanders are not big fans of policy making. We tend to go the trial and error route with emphasis on the error part. But to be honest and fair, I think when it comes to renewable energy, when it comes to geothermal, we have though been successful in policy making. I think our Foreign Minister, Mr. Skarphéðinsson, pointed that out in his speech yesterday, and others as well, that policies of the governments in the past, where we mitigated drilling risk for municipalities, has brought us to the status today that we have approximately 90% of house heating from geothermal, which is saving a lot of money for us. As you could see yesterday, in a cold winter day, we are heating the houses mostly with geothermal energy, and I've heard the numbers that we are saving about 50 to 60 billion Icelandic kronas annually. This is a big number for the Icelandic economy. I would think, if I'm not mistaken, it's around 3 to 4% of GDP, or even higher. But anyway, policy making is necessary. It is important, very important, to avoid future conflicts, to have policy for the future. And before I start to elaborate on policy making, I want to show you one of my favorite graphs. A bit philosophical, but anyway, it's very informative. Philosophy is not my strongest side, but anyway, being an engineer, I'm still looking for my strong side, though, and haven't found it yet. But there's a clear relationship, as you see in this graph, which should show the relationship between prosperity of nations and energy usage. It's sometimes referred to as Mr. David Rowland bubble bath, all these bubbles, especially when they are painted in bluish color, but I chose to use the KPMG colors here. So it shows that when a nation is moving towards prosperity, is increasing its GDP, it needs to consume more energy. This is the industrialization of the nation, of course, and this graph, as you can see, this at least the x-axis is what do you call it? The x-axis is not linear. So you see the poorest nation on the left, of course, and the OECD countries and the richest nation on the right, and they all tend to use much energy. And when those big bubbles, India and China, they are on the fastest path today towards prosperity, and they need to consume much energy. So despite all the fact that we are increasing our energy efficiency, and we might be seeing this as an S-curve, so the richest nation, or the nations with the highest prosperity, they might not need any much further energy to drive their economical growth in the future, which is a good news, but we still have to move these big ones along this path. So this convinced me, at least, that we are going to see for the next years increased energy demand in the world and maybe higher prices. So that brings us to the question whether energy security isn't the biggest matter in the policy making today. We'll see that later on. It probably is by many nations. Coming to Iceland, Iceland is a special case, as you see here. It breaks the rule, and Qatar does as well. These are the countries with stranded power. These are countries with little population, but much natural and economical potential. So Iceland and Qatar are breaking actually the graph. And the reason is, of course, that we are using the energy here to attract foreign energy-intensive companies to locate themselves here and use the potential. Energy policy in general has been categorized in 3 phases. Phase 1 until 74, which was the period of energy abundance. Nobody cared. There was enough energy in the world. It wasn't an issue, actually. Between 75, just like Jay showed here before in his graph, then we had this energy crisis coming. And that stimulated the growth of renewables in the US and in all the kinds of energy sources. That was mainly a energy security issue. So this is the period has been defined as the period of energy deficiency, also from 75 to 85. So the period until 2000 has been described as the period of energy balance. But today, we have from 2000, we have a period that has not been named before or not in the literature, but is defined by these 3 factors mainly. It is the security of supply that we are looking for. In many policies of other countries, we see that security of supply, energy supply, is the biggest factor. Secondly, the competitiveness of the energy market is also an issue, pricing, etc. And then thirdly, but not least, environmental issues. This graph from the newest International Energy Association report shows as well that referring to the graph earlier, that the OECD nations are actually reducing their energy dependency, but while the rest of the world is moving towards the industrial part of the curve and are still increasing the energy usage and energy demand, and will do so for the years to come, most of them at least. So taking these 3 factors to Iceland, and I want to elaborate on them. And maybe adding the 4th one, which is a special factor which needs to be at least discussed in a country like Iceland, which is has this stranded power concept or syndrome, and just like Qatar or even Quebec back in the 1970s and Norway as well. We'll come to that later. But first of all, energy security in Iceland. When it comes to electrical generation, the electrical generation in Iceland is probably 5 times the need of the public market. So we can say we are very safe there. And there is actually virtually no import of consumables in the electricity sector. However, on the hydrocarbon side, we are very dependent. We have a big fishing fleet, and we are far away from our market, so we need a lot of ships, and we need to use a lot of transportation means, and they're all driven by hydrocarbons, which are imported. Now, regarding the competitiveness of the energy market, then there is a natural monopoly in distribution and sales of hot water, and I think we are fine with that. It works quite well. There is a oligopoly in the sale and distribution of fuel. This is because of the small market in Iceland, and not much we can do about that. Same actually goes for electrical generation and sale, yet many would disagree with me that there is an upcoming competition there. But the share of government ownership in the electric generation and heating is very high. So if these companies are forming economic rent with high prices or capturing resource rent, then most of it goes to the state or municipalities anyway through the ownership. Thirdly, regarding environmental issues, when it comes to electrical generation, it's absolutely, actually almost 100% from renewables. So there is little room for improvements there in Iceland. So we are not emphasized on that. But the share of green energy in space heating is also very high, as I mentioned, 90%. I'm not sure if I'm correct, but it's close to that. There's some room for improvement. But as I mentioned earlier, we are heavily dependent on fossil fuels as well. So both the fishery industry and transportation, both sectors are largely large hydrocarbon consumers. So there's a lot of improvement there, and we have to follow the routes of others of introducing other kinds of transportation means, such as electrical cars. And then we come to the fourth element. The big question is that we have such an abundance of energy in the country and a little market. Should we have an energy utilization policy? Should the government control or try to involve in a decision what the energy is used for? For example, when we were working on that, we had very few examples in the world. We had Norway 20 years ago. Norway did not, by then, impose any means to increase the use of energy in one sector and decrease it in another. They just let the free market do that. But Norway has now connected itself to the neighboring countries, firstly to Sweden and then through submarine cables to Denmark and Netherlands, and is continuing that route. So they are more or less, going to export the energy, and they're going to be a part of the European big grid. Canada is an example, maybe, very similar as Norway, but the interconnection has increased a lot there as well. But Middle East have stranded gases as well, so they are an example that we can look at and have looked at. And the question remains whether we should have an energy utilization policy and what would it look like, and we'll come to that later. Now, in 2009, the Ministry of Industry formed a committee with the aim of developing a holistic energy policy for the country. And the minister presented a report in the parliament in 2011. The guiding light of that policy was the statement here: Iceland's energy need will be met in a sustainable way for the benefits of the people and society, whatever that means. Under this guiding light, there are 6 pillars, which are listed down here, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to emphasize on the key disputes. I think that's the most interesting things. Under the first pillar, the energy need of the people and businesses will be secure in the short and long term. There were no disputes at all. I think we'll skip that, but the next one, energy resource utilization, shall respect the environment, nature, and characteristic of the country. And for that, the government has made a master plan for geothermal and hydropower development. We'll see the result of that in a slide afterwards. The third one, the people reap from benefits from resource utilization. The key disputes here was, should we try to capture the resource rent if it's going to form? We'll see that it's not apparently yet, at least. And shorten the utilization permits or shorten the concession, which is also a debate in our society. Okay, the fourth one is national contribution of the energy industry will be maximized. One of the key disputes there, and it's going to be in the discussion here for a while now, is potential interconnector to the European grid. We'll see that as well afterwards. And the fifth one, energy supply meets the requirements of diverse industries. And the sixth one, use of imported fuels, be reduced as much as possible. There is a total agreement on that too. Okay, regarding the pillar, national contribution of the energy industry will be maximized. Some say there's a potential for much higher electricity prices for the nation to capture. Prices in Iceland are very low, extremely low, I would say, compared to the rest of the world. And that's because of the market circumstances here. We have sold the power on cost-plus agreements, long-term cost-plus agreements. I have nothing against that. That's just the market situation as it is. And according to Landsvirkjun, our national power company, annual report 2012, the average price of sold power to big consumers was $26 per megawatt hour, which I think everybody will agree and is on in world comparison quite a low figure. And this includes transmission cost as well. And this is last year, and this the same figure for the last 5 years, actually. Now, Landsvirkjun hopes that it has been attracting foreign companies, energy-intensive companies, to look at themselves here. So they have officially spoken about new price level of $43 per megawatt hours. But on the other side of the continent, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, we have the European Union that have set a challenging goal for 2020 goal, the 2020 goal of share of renewables, minimum share of renewables. And the UK, which is our nearest country, believes that their target can be reached by energy delivery from a subset of 8 technologies. The biggest one will be offshore wind, 30 to 60 terawatt hours, sorry. And they are introducing a new legislation, what they call electricity market reform, which is an initiative to stimulate investment in the renewable energy sector. And under this scheme, they will introduce CFDs, or contract for differences, which is quite similar to feed-in tariffs in other parts of the world, in Germany, for example. Except the only difference is that, if I understand this correctly, you will sell the power to the grid or on the free market, and you will claim the difference price of the legislation from the government or through that means. So you will get a fixed price for 15 or 20 years. That has not been decided yet. But if you look at the cost of offshore wind, it is very high compared to what we are seeing as a price here in Iceland. They say a newly issued report by the Crown Estate in the UK, which are owner of much of the land and the ocean bottom in the North Sea. They think that the level of cost of energy from wind farms, offshore wind farms, by 2020 could be around $150. So there is a lot of space for, there's a lot of price difference, about $70, if we calculate also the cost of transmission as we see it yet through an interconnector. And the question remains if and how this difference can be shared with both parties, that it is Iceland and the UK. And the mean to do that is to install the longest cable, subsea interconnector cable in the world, from Iceland to the continent, or to the UK, which is the shortest route. A governmental committee studied this. This has been studied now and then for the last 60 years, I think. And the last formal report by the government was issued in 1993. And by that time, the most of the emphasis was on a cable to the Netherlands. The market has changed a bit since then. 2 things have changed, mainly. Power price differences have increased, especially if this can be regarded as a green power and a part of the 2020 target. And the second thing that has changed is that we have more cables which are closer in size than we had before. We have this cable between Norway, this interconnector between Norway and Netherlands, which is about 580 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken, and that's the longest cable in the world today. But Norway is going further. They are now planning another cable from the west coast to the UK, which will be around 700, 800 kilometers. So our cable will not then be an order of magnitude larger or longer. Depth is another factor which is also has to be borne in mind. The idea is, the discussion is around a cable of the size of 700 to 1200 megawatts, and the cost will be probably around or over $2 billion if you go the shortest route with the smallest cable. Possible commercial operation date will then be 2020 on when the target should be met, and power losses are calculated 5 to 6% if you go the shortest route. The policy members of the policy group, they all concluded that the isolation of the Iceland grid shall be terminated by the means of interconnection, if that appears to macroeconomically feasible, and that's a big question, which is being studied as we speak. Now, the second pillar, one of the pillars was the people reap the benefits from resource utilization. As you saw, the current prices from geothermal power plants in Iceland are quite low. So the price level today does not indicate a high resource rent being generated by the hydro or geothermal sector. This can change if prices start to rise, especially by the oldest geothermal and hydro power plants, which have depreciated their assets but are still functional. So there might be, we might see resource rent being generated in these power plants in the future. And a newly issued report by McKinsey on the future of the Icelandic economy indicates that we might be able to capture a resource rent from renewable energy amounting 4 to 6% of GDP if such an interconnector is installed. Norway has, for example, done both. They have interconnected their country and they have implied a resource rent taxation on their power sector. And the policy, again, conclude that this should be prepared at least. We should prepare a resource rent taxation in the power industry in order to get prepared for rising power levels. One of the again to the same pillar, and then the people reap from the benefits from the resource utilization. It was a debate about permit duration or concession duration. According to the current legislation, the government may grant third-party private firms utilization permits up to 65 years. The Parliament was then, when the committee was working on this, was then working on a bill which shortened the permits duration to 40 years for hydro and even further for geothermal, down to 30 years. And the majority of the Energy Policy Committee proposed even further cut the duration and shorten them to 25 to 30 years with the possibility of extension. One member was against, and that happens to be myself. The power companies had objections. The head of a local power company predicted, for example, that the end of geothermal utilization was this would be the end of geothermal utilization if the time is altered that much. And obviously, investors contemplating resource utilization must seek capture returns within the permit duration. To understand this issue and the discussion, we have to bear in mind that in Iceland, when we talk about resources and resource policy, the first thing that comes in people's mind is fishery policy, which is today our biggest resource. Energy is going to be that very soon, I think, in terms of GDP. But fisheries policy is in the mind of people, and consensus rights there are the key debate in our society. So our work, when we were discussing this, was to compare this and explain the differences between a concession in the power industry and a quota right in the fishery industry. And all these three explanation points that I bring here, or at least two of them, are to do that. The aim was to describe the differences. First one is just the payback period. Higher energy prices allow shorter duration. People were saying in other countries there are shorter durations of concessions. Yes, they are, but the energy prices level in Iceland are low. We need to have longer periods to allow them to get the payback. Second pillar was that scrap, resale market, you cannot sell a power plant without a license. It has no value. Whereas in the fishing industry, a ship has a close to 100% of renovation cost if they lose the license. So there is no loss there on capital, should not, theoretically at least. And there is no existence of active permit market when people were comparing this to maybe another resource which are emission rights, where permits are traded on a nearly perfect market. That cannot be implemented in the geothermal sector, of course. So that explains the difference there. And in order to explain this, I set up a very, very simple calculation on a single modular, theoretical and non-existing geothermal power plant with an installed capacity of 1 megawatt. Used just an example or construction cost of $2,500 a megawatt. Kilowatt it should be, isn't it? And utilization time of 8,300 hours, O&M 2.5%, and depreciation 4%. So this would be the cash flow from such a plant. Construction time 4 years, and operation time, let's say 40. We have to have it long here because the current legislation indicates says 65 years with extension. So this is the theoretical cash flow from this extremely simple model. Cumulative cash flow would look like this. So in 12 years, if there is no interest rate applied, then the simple payback time is 12 years. And the reason for why I'm not using any interest rate here is that I'm just calculating the simple payback time. But if I use 8% hurdle rate, then we have a 30 years payback time of that investment, and it's almost not going over the limit. So it's in very simple terms. It won't be very feasible investment for a 25-year concession, and we have to bear in mind the local situation when we do such a drastic decision, when we take such a drastic decision. Now, by the time one of the companies active here on the market, they were also developing a project in Italy. By the time we were looking at, there was some news about that in the media, and the concession time there were much shorter. Now, I don't remember how long it was, but according to the media, the prices there were around $200. So there is a difference in payback time it goes down to 3%. Now, and a typical geothermal power plant is not built in one phase. A typical geothermal power plant would be built, I would say, theoretically in 3 phases. That was a rule of thumb when I was in university. We should at least assess the aquifer, assess the resource, and build 1/3 in the first phase and operate that for 3 or 5 years, and then build the second phase and then the third one. But this was just a theoretical approach. If we do that, then a power plant with 8% hurdle rate would be economical after 25 years only, because of the cash flow is negative during construction time and extensions. And this is how we want the users to behave on the resource. We want them to be careful and not build large plants immediately and then have to reduce, if calculations were wrong, have to reduce the sizes. So this is still a debate. I think the Parliament has not changed its current legislation. They are still working on this. So this is still in the discussion among us. Now, under the pillar, one of the pillar one of the debate was about energy resource utilization shall respect the environment, nature, and characteristic of the country. It has, of course, been an increasing pressure from environmentalists to protect the nature. We are seeing a lot of growth in tourism industry. People are visiting Iceland for the untouched nature, and we have to bear in mind that this is also an option to increase tourism industry, and we want to protect the environment. So in order to avoid conflicts in the future, once each and every power plant is built, the Parliament wanted to decide on a master plan of geothermal and hydro utilization in the country. 67 selected sites were valued against a couple of factors, environmental factors, feasibility and power, and social factors as well. And these are the sites. They're both geothermal and hydro. So the main result is that the Parliament just decided that last month. So out of 16 that went into the exploration category this time from Parliament are 14 geothermal. They are about 8,500 gigawatt hours. And so we are probably seeing more emphasis on geothermal energy in the next years to come in Iceland and in hydro, because most of the hydro power plants went either in the protection or still in the waiting category and waiting for further research. Now, this was it. I just want to finish by pitch you on a bit on my company, KPMG. You know that probably well. We are not only doing audit and tax, we also do advisory. We are the biggest professionally advisory group in Iceland. And in corporate finance, we are probably the leading firm when it comes to M&A. We have defined center of excellences in each sector of the renewable energy power industry, renewable energy industry. But the center of excellence has not been defined for geothermal. It's such a niche. But if you ask me, I'm not hesitating to tell you where it is. Actually, it's we here in the Icelandic office, we're doing a lot in that sector. So thank you for your attention.